Good, and I'm going to read a very short statement. The subject was pretty vast, and I thought if I provided a short statement and then that might generate questions, which, and this might be the best way to do it, because I really want to know what you want to know about this. So let me read this statement. In 1967, because of my concern about the rapidly growing use of the dangerous drug marijuana, I began my studies of the scientific and medical literature with the goal of providing a reasonably objective summary of the data which underlay its prohibition. Much to my surprise, I found no credible scientific basis for the justification of this prohibition. The assertion that it is a very toxic drug is based on old and new myths. In fact, one of the many exceptional features of this drug is its remarkably limited toxicity. Compared to aspirin, which people are free to purchase and use without the advice of a physician, or a prescription for that matter, cannabis is much safer. There are well over 1,000 deaths annually from aspirin in this country alone, and there has never been a death from marijuana anywhere. In fact, when cannabis regains its place in the U.S. pharmacopoeia, a status it lost after the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, it will be seen as one of the safest drugs in that compendium. Moreover, it will eventually be hailed as a wonder drug, just as penicillin was in the early 1940s. Penicillin achieved this reputation because, for three reasons. It was remarkably non-toxic. It was, once produced on an economy of scale, quite inexpensive, and it was effective in the treatment of a variety of infectious diseases. Similarly, cannabis is exceptionally safe, and once free of the prohibition tariff, it will be significantly less expensive than the conventional drugs it replaces, and it already has an impressive record of versatility, a record which continues to expand. Given these features of this drug, it should come as no surprise that its use as a medicine is growing exponentially, or that individual states have established legislation which make it possible for patients suffering from a variety of disorders to use the drug legally. Beginning with California in 1996, 13 other states and the District of Columbia have followed suit, and others are in the process of enacting such legislation. Unfortunately, because each state arrogates the right to define which symptoms and syndromes may, with a written recommendation from a physician, be lawfully treated with cannabis, many patients with legitimate claims to the therapeutic usefulness of this plant must continue to use it illegally and therefore endure the extra layer of anxiety imposed by its illegality. Of those states which now allow medical use of cannabis, New Jersey has imposed medical criteria which are so restrictive that I would estimate that only a small fraction of the pool of patients who would find marijuana to be as or more useful than the conventional drugs it would displace will be allowed access to it. Regardless of the symptoms or syndromes for which cannabis is useful, it is invariably less toxic than the conventional drugs it displaces. It is most important not to make any legislation aimed at making it easier for patients to use marijuana as a medicine, not be too restrictive lest it substantially defeat that goal. And I would be delighted to answer questions about this medicine.
Any questions from the committee?
Yeah, I'm just leafing through his document that he shared with us that we have here, and he talks about the fact that currently there's only anecdotal information and data about medical marijuana for medicinal purposes. Can you tell me if there's been any recent information that has taken us from anecdotal to now something more substance to kind of show its impact on patients and their position?
Certainly. Doctor, Representative Wheatley has a question. He's referring to one of your 2005 publications that cited anecdotal evidence in support of medicinal marijuana. Is there now medical evidence, scientific evidence, clinical evidence to support your conclusion that marijuana has beneficial medicinal value?
Yes. Let me answer that question. First, Representative Wheatley, I would remind you that in the days of Sir William Osler, let's say from the last half of the 18th century through the time when large-scale double-blind studies of drugs, the present gold standard for the acceptance by the FDA of a drug as a legitimate therapeutic substance which can be distributed. All the clinical data that we have up until that time was anecdotal. So, medicine didn't begin with a double-blind study and the use of treatments. Fortunately, digitalis, for example, didn't have to wait until large double-blind studies, nor did aspirin, nor did penicillin, nor did insulin. These were evaluated on the basis of clinical medicine. Would you believe that the first trial of penicillin took place in 1941? It was given to 6 patients with different gram-positive infections, like pneumonia or staphylococcus or what have you, and all of them were treated successfully, and on that basis, it was immediately accepted as an antibiotic. Now, when you consider marijuana, the fact is that we have mountains of anecdotal evidence, and if you wish to see a few little peaks of that mountain, you could take a look at my medical marijuana website, www.rxmarijuana, as though rxmarijuana with one word, .com. Now, what has happened? When I wrote the book, Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine, there were no studies. It was all based on anecdotal evidence. It was like a book that could have been written in Sir William Osler's time. Sir William Osler, who said of the treatment of marijuana, of migraine headache, with marijuana, it is the superior treatment. It is the primary treatment. Now, so my book was based on anecdotal evidence. But what is happening now is that we are getting these double-blind studies. They are few and far between, and many of them are carried on by the GW Pharmaceutical company in Britain, which produced Sativex, which will be a drug which I expect to be approved in this country very shortly. But they have done large double-blind studies to satisfy the authorities in Canada and Spain and some other nations, and soon in the United States and Britain. Britain already, the United States, I think, soon. That these studies show in only one of the many symptoms and syndromes that marijuana is effective, what we say in Marijuana Reconsidered. This is a superb drug for treating the spasticity, the pain, and even some of the other symptoms like urinary incontinence in multiple sclerosis. And the other studies that have been done are all, they got the idea that maybe we should look at this sativix or whatever other pharmaceutical cannabinoid they've developed. They got the idea from looking at this anecdotal evidence. And each time they have taken one of those things that has been demonstrated through anecdotal evidence, the study has affirmed that this has a place in the treatment of that disorder, whether it be multiple sclerosis, migraine, ulcerative colitis, glaucoma, a whole host of different symptoms and syndromes, the list of which grows as we speak.
Thank you, Doctor. Any other questions from the committee?
Just one more. Just on this.
One more question, Doctor. 1 second.
Sure.
In his testimony that I'm reading right here, he talks about what he thinks the real reason government, the reason why federal government doesn't want to legalize or recognize it as this particular drug. And he talks about it because once people get to see that it doesn't have any ill impact, that then they would want to legalize it for any and all purposes. Can you help me understand his thought around that process? Like his statement that federal government and to an extension state governments are more inclined to not legalize or recognize this as a medical drug because of not what it does for the patient, but what it means for the. Because I asked you a previous question around the slippery slope, so essentially he's kind of addressing that. So I just want to hear this kind of.